Hello guys, welcome back to A to the Dentistry, a channel which features easy explanation of various medical and dental related topics. And our today's topic is Sharpey's fibers. So without any further delay, let's get started. Sharpey's fibers, by definition, are collagen bundles of periodontal ligament which are embedded into the cementum and alveolar bone. Right. So on one side, these ligaments which are derived from the periodontal ligament are connected to the cementum, and on the other side, they are connected to the alveolar bone. Now, the chief function of Sharpey's fibers is that they provide anchorage and support, and thereby ensure the stability of the tooth within the socket. Fibers. So the first and most important function of Sharpey's fiber is nothing but the mechanical support, right? So as we have discussed previously, that they are a key part which ensures the stability of the tooth within the socket, right? So therefore its first function is nothing but anchorage of the tooth within the socket, right? And obviously the next function would be prevention of tooth displacement, right? So these fibers, they pass from cementum towards the alveolar bone, right? These are passing from cementum towards the alveolar bone, and these are providing anchorage. These are providing an anchorage point to the tooth so that the tooth does not get displaced within the socket, right? So Sharpey's fibers are embedded deeply into the cementum on one end and alveolar bone onto the other, securing the tooth firmly within the alveolus, right? This ensures stability during mastication. Then prevention of tooth displacement. These fibers resist heavy forces that could otherwise displace the tooth laterally, apically or occlusally, right? So whenever forces of mastication are present, right, so they tend to displace the tooth in all possible directions, like either laterally or apically or occlusally, right? So these fibers basically maintain the integrity of the tooth within the socket. Okay, next function is shock absorption. Okay, so these fibers ensure equal distribution of forces, right, across the PDL. Okay, these help distribute and dissipate the occlusal biting forces across the alveolar bone, protecting the tooth as well as the surrounding bone from trauma, right? So whenever there are huge amount of occlusal forces, these fibers, what they will do, they will resist this forces and act as a cushion, right? They will provide a cushioning effect and protect the tooth as well as bone from the trauma. Other function is adaptation to stress, right? Now we have discussed previously that either they will be oriented perpendicularly or they are present obliquely, right? So these oblique orientation allows them to stretch and absorb the compressive forces, right, acting like a suspension bridge to cushion the impact of the forces. Okay, so this is about the shock absorption property. It will distribute the forces as well as it will help the tooth to adapt to the stresses. Okay, the functions of Sharpey's fibers. So here we can see these are the fibers. On one end they are embedded into the alveolar bone here, and on the another end into the cementum, right? So you can remember it as a tooth within a socket, right? So first function we have discussed was the mechanical support, right? So here we can see all these bundles of fiber. What they are doing, they are providing a means of anchorage for the tooth within the alveolar bone. Okay, so that is the first function. It is providing anchorage. So when something is providing an anchorage, obviously it is preventing certain kind of displacement, right? When I say something is providing me a means of anchorage, obviously it is preventing a movement or a displacement in apical direction, occlusal direction, as well as laterally, right, as well as laterally. So the first function was mechanical support, right? The first function was mechanical support, under which we have seen in this diagram, obviously it is providing anchorage and preventing displacement. So we have anchorage and prevention of displacement. Very easy to remember, right? Next we have seen shock absorption property. Okay, so whenever any forces are directed towards the tooth, right? So tooth is a hard structure and it is connected to this alveolar bone or the socket through these fibers. Like why? Because we need a cushion. We need something like a cushion which can resist those occlusal forces. Like So the main theme here is the cushioning effect, right? The shock absorption property is related to first equal distribution of forces. Now look at this arrangement. Look at this arrangement. Here we can see there is a proper arrangement made by the nature so that there is equal distribution of forces from the tooth to the bone. From the tooth to the bone, right? So this is the first sub point under shock absorption, that is equal distribution of forces, and second is obviously adaptation to stress, right? By providing a cushioning effect, these fibers are providing an adaptation to the stress. Moving on towards the third and fourth function, again one of the extension of previous two functions which we have seen, right? So attachment of by attaching to cementum and the bone, these fibers maintain the structural integrity within the PDL, right, which again supports the tooth within the socket. Then it helps in interconnection, right? So as they are linking to surrounding tissues, right, so they are facilitating the coordination of movement as well as resistance to masticatory forces. Okay, so they are maintaining first of all attachment and second interconnection with other structures as well. Then we have facilitation of tooth mobility. Okay, so these Sharpey's fibers allow slight mobility of the tooth, right? We have discussed previously, they are acting as a cushion, right? So they are allowing slight mobility of the tooth within the socket. Now this is very essential for accommodating the functional stresses without causing any damage. Okay, so this slight amount of mobility is very essential to prevent damage to the tooth as well as to the bone. Now there is a orthodontic relevance point as well. So what happens during the orthodontic treatment, the Sharpey's fibers adapt, right? These are subjected to adaptation by remodeling under the control forces, right? So by putting up braces, what we are doing, we are providing some kind of forces as per our desire, okay, so that we can move the tooth in a way we want, right? So these Sharpey's fibers adapt by remodeling under those control orthodontic forces, enabling the tooth movement while maintaining the attachment, right? So we don't want loss of attachment, that will lead to PDL problems. So these Sharpey's fibers are very important from the orthodontic perspective as well, right? So by remodeling, they adapt to those control forces and enable tooth movement while maintaining the attachment, right, by preventing the loss of attachment. So here this diagram is depicting of Sharpey's fibers to the bone as well as to the cementum, right, to the alveolar bone and the cementum. So this helps in maintaining the integrity, right? This helps in maintaining the integrity of the pedontium. Also, we can demarcate the interconnectedness of the Sharpey's fibers with the other structures, right? So this facilitates controlled movement of the tooth within the socket. Okay, and also resistance to the forces of mastication which are delivered onto the tooth surface, right? Then we have talked about control movement, right? So these Sharpey's fibers will allow only a slight movement of the tooth within the socket, so they can adapt to the functional stresses. Okay, and also during the orthodontic treatment, what they will do, they will adapt by remodeling. Okay, and therefore they will enable the tooth movement, at the same time they will prevent loss of attachment. So this is a very beautiful diagram, you can definitely draw this in your paper for some extra marks. Moving on to the fifth and sixth function of the Sharpey's fibers. So again, they are very crucial in maintaining the health of pedontium and also enabling its regeneration, right? So in a healthy state, Sharpey's fiber contribute to the attachment apparatus, which ensures the integrity of the periodontal ligament, cementum and the alveolar bone. They are also very important for healing and repair process, right? So as the PDL itself is a very dynamic tissue, so continuously there is a process of healing and repair occurring. So during periodontal therapy or after any trauma, the regeneration efforts focus on restoring the Sharpey's fibers to re-establish the attachment apparatus. As they are the key components of the PDL itself, so it is very necessary during the periodontal therapy or after trauma to restore the Sharpey's fiber so that they can enable the healthy pedontium. Sixth function is transmission of sensory stimuli. So as we know, PDL is a living tissue, right? It has certain mechanoreceptors which transfer the mechanical stimuli, right? So the Sharpey's fiber also has some sensory functions. as they transmit the mechanical stimuli, right? Any kind of mechanical pressure, such as during chewing, right? The mechanoreceptors which are present within the periodontal ligament, and this helps to regulate the chewing forces and prevent any overloading during the chewing, right? So this is very important function of the Sharpey's fiber, right? So it also has a very important function which is sensory in nature. This is very important to remember here. Moving on towards the last function, bone remodeling and maintenance of the bone. So first of all, we'll talk about the influence of Sharpey's fibers onto the alveolar bone, right? So these fibers exert a tension on the alveolar bone during functional activities, right? This stimulates the bone remodeling and maintenance through the application of physiological stress, right? So there are two kind of stresses onto the tooth. One is physiological and other is obviously the pathological stresses. So in case of a physiological stress, these Sharpey's fibers exert small amounts of tension onto the alveolar bone, right? So whenever there is a functional load onto the surface of the tooth, via these Sharpey's fibers, the force is transmitted to the underlying bone, right? So this stimulates the bone remodeling under physiological stresses. Other function is adaptation to functional forces, right? So continuous remodeling of the bone with the help of the Sharpey's fibers and surrounding structures adapt to the changes in the masticatory forces, right? So it also has a very important role in enabling the PDL to adapt to the functional forces. Okay. So guys, that was all about functions of Sharpey's fibers. I hope you understood the topic very well. If you like the video, kindly consider subscribing to my channel. Till then, this is Dr. Snehal signing off. Bye bye.